The smell hit me first. Not the honest, wood smoke scent of a real barbecue, but the chemical bite of cheap charcoal briquettes and the cloying sweetness of corporate-branded iced tea. It was the smell of forced fun. The Innovatech annual company picnic, held in a manicured park in Maple Creek, a patch of green so perfect it looked like it had been rendered on a computer. Children I didn't know shrieked on a nearby playground, their laughter sharp and thin in the humid Ohio air. I was holding a paper plate, a sweating dome of potato salad threatening to collapse onto a flimsy hot dog bun. I felt like a ghost at a feast, an artifact from another era, placed carefully among the gleaming, ambitious young people who orbited my son-in-law. Mark had his hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was a gesture of ownership, of presentation, like he was showing off a piece of furniture he'd reluctantly acquired. His smile was dazzling, a flash of white aimed at a man in a golf shirt with the Innovatech logo stitched over his heart. This was Mr. Davies, the CEO, a man whose face was a permanent mask of bland, powerful affability. "Charles, you know my wife, the brilliant Chloe?" Mark said, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that carried over the murmur of the crowd. Chloe, my daughter, beamed and offered a delicate wave. She looked beautiful, her summer dress the color of a sunset, her hair catching the light. She looked happy. She looked like a stranger. Of course. The brains of the operation," Davies boomed, shaking Chloe's hand. Mark's hand tightened on my shoulder, a subtle, controlling pressure. "And this," he announced, his voice taking on a stage-managed tone of playful exasperation. "This is my lovely mother-in-law, Elizabeth." He paused for effect, his smile widening, letting the silence hang in the air for just a beat too long. The small circle of executives turned their attention to me. I felt their eyes, curious, indifferent. I was an anomaly. Everyone here had a title, a function, a purpose within the Innovatech ecosystem. I just had a paper plate. "She's been staying with us for a little while now," Mark continued, his voice dripping with a false, indulgent warmth that felt like acid on my skin. She's our unemployed, live-in problem." He delivered the word problem with a flourish, a punchline, and the laughter came, just as he knew it would. It wasn't a cruel, vicious laugh. It was worse. It was a dismissive, polite chuckle. The kind of sound you make at a harmless, slightly pathetic joke. They were laughing with Mark, at me. I was a prop. A funny anecdote about the domestic burdens of a rising star executive. I saw it in their eyes, the flicker of pity, the quick assessment, the swift dismissal, the old woman, the dependent, the problem. Chloe laughed too. It was a light, tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. She gave my arm a little squeeze, a gesture that was meant to say, "He's only kidding, Mom. Play along." But I knew it was more than that. It was a warning. Don't make a scene. Don't ruin this for us. I didn't react. I didn't gasp or cry or defend myself. Years of quiet grief had taught me how to be still, how to absorb a blow without flinching. I simply smiled. It was a small, brittle thing, a mask I had perfected over the last year. I tilted my head, as if acknowledging the jest. "Well," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "Every successful man needs a good problem to solve. It keeps him sharp." The CEO, Mr. Davies, let out a bark of a laugh, a little too loud. "She's got you there, Mark. A firecracker." Mark's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected me to speak. He had expected me to shrink. He patted my shoulder again, a little harder this time. "That she is. A real firecracker." The words were complimentary, but the tone was a clear dismissal. The conversation moved on, swirling around stock options and server upgrades and a new project codenamed Elysian Echoes. I stood there, a statue holding a wilting hot dog, the laughter still ringing in my ears. It was in that moment, surrounded by the smell of lighter fluid and the sound of corporate back-patting, that something inside me shifted. It wasn't a sudden, violent explosion of anger. It was quieter, colder. It was the feeling of a heavy, rusted gear, dormant for a year, grinding into motion with a low, deep groan. A part of my mind that had been fogged over with sorrow and resignation began to clear. The problem wasn't that I was unemployed. The problem wasn't that I was living in my daughter's house. The problem was that I was, for the first time since my husband died, beginning to see everything and everyone clearly. The car ride home was a symphony of silence. Mark drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He was humming along to some bland pop song on the radio, a performance of nonchalance. Chloe sat in the passenger seat, scrolling relentlessly through her phone, the screen illuminating her face with a cold, blue light. I sat in the back, the seatbelt cutting into my chest, watching the manicured suburban houses of Maple Creek slide past the window. Each one looked identical: a perfect lawn, a two-car garage, a basketball hoop, a gilded cage. "That was a great time," Chloe said finally, her voice thin, not looking up from her phone. "Everyone loves you, honey." "They love the results I bring," Mark said, a little too sharply. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting mine for a second. "You were a hit, Elizabeth. Old Mr. Davies thinks you're a real card." I didn't answer. I just watched the road unwind behind us. "Lighten up, Elizabeth," he said, his voice softening into that familiar, condescending purr. "It was a joke, a little roast. It's what guys like us do. You can't be so sensitive." "I'm not sensitive, Mark," I said, my voice even. "I'm observant." The car fell silent again. This silence was different. It was heavier. Tense. Chloe finally put her phone down, turning in her seat to look at me. Her expression was one of genuine frustration, of a daughter tired of her mother's moods. "Mom, please, don't do this. Don't make it into a thing. It was a party. Mark was just trying to be funny. He's under a lot of pressure." "The pressure to call his mother-in-law a problem in front of his boss?" I asked. "Oh my God," she sighed, turning back to face the front. "You're twisting it. You always do this. You twist things." And there it was, the foundation of my new reality. I was the one who was wrong. I was the one twisting things. I was the problem. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window and closed my eyes, but I wasn't resting. I was remembering. The house was always quiet now, but a year ago it had been filled with the sounds of my husband, Robert, the scrape of his chair in his workshop, the low rumble of his voice as he talked to the dog, the scent of sawdust and coffee that clung to his clothes. Now the silence was an accusation. It echoed in the hallways of the beige, tastefully decorated house that had once been ours and was now theirs. My daughter, Chloe, drifted through the rooms like a phantom, her phone a permanent extension of her hand, her conversations with me brief and functional. "Do you need anything from the store, Mom?" "The gardener is coming on Tuesday. Mark's working late again." It had been exactly 1 year, 3 weeks, and 2 days since Robert died. The official report was tidy, clinical. Massive coronary event. A heart attack. Quick, clean, tragically simple. He was 62. He had the blood pressure of a teenager. He walked 4 miles every morning. But a piece of paper with a doctor's signature had declared it so, and the world had moved on. But my memory wasn't tidy. My memory was loud, and it played on a loop in the quiet hours of the night. My memory was of the evening before he died. He had come upstairs from his workshop in the basement, his face pale, his hands coated in a fine layer of dust. He bypassed the kitchen, ignored the mail on the counter, and came straight to me in the living room. "Liz," he'd said, his voice low and urgent. He never called me Liz unless something was deeply wrong. "Come here." He led me to his study, a room Mark and Chloe had since redecorated into a sterile home office for her fledgling interior design business. But in my memory, it was still Robert's room, filled with books on carpentry and history, a half-finished crossword puzzle on his desk. He sat me down. "I was doing some maintenance on the home network," he said. Robert was a craftsman, a man who worked with his hands, but he wasn't a Luddite. He'd built our home network from scratch. Mark's laptop. It was connected. I was cleaning out some malware and I saw his files are synced to a cloud server. I shouldn't have looked, I know, but a folder was open. A file. "What was it, Robert?" I asked, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. He shook his head, looking not at me, but at the wall, as if trying to unsee something. I don't even know how to describe it. It looked like a business plan, a prospectus, but the language, it was unholy. Robert was a man of sawdust and steel, not scripture. For him to use a word like unholy was an earthquake. It was about digital replication, archiving people. But the way it was written, it was cold. It talked about source material acquisition and emotional imprinting. And there was a list of names, Liz, with dates next to them. Financial projections linked to their estates. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. "I don't know," he said, his voice raw. "I don't know what it is, but it's sick, it's predatory." And I saw a name on that list I recognized, Frank Peterson, from Mark's old firm, the one who had that freak hiking accident last fall. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide with a fear I had never seen in him before. "I have to talk to him. I have to confront him. Tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. The next morning, I woke up to silence, a silence so absolute it felt like the world had ended. I went downstairs. The coffee wasn't on. The newspaper was still on the porch. I found him on the floor of his workshop. Mark was the one who found me kneeling beside him. I remember the shock, the cold dread. A scream caught in my throat. And then I remember Mark. His hands were on my arms, firm, pulling me up, steering me away. "Elizabeth, no. Don't look. Let me handle this." His voice was a rock of calm in my sea of panic. Too calm. He moved with an unnerving efficiency, calling 911, speaking to the dispatcher in a clear, measured voice, reporting a cardiac arrest. When the paramedics arrived, he and Chloe stood together, a perfect tableau of grief. Chloe's face was buried in his shoulder, her body racked with sobs that seemed almost choreographed. Mark held her, his own eyes wet, his expression a mask of devastated sorrow. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. They said all the right things. They cried all the right tears. But I saw it then, even through my own shattering pain. I saw the way their eyes would occasionally meet over my head, a quick, silent communication. I saw the way Mark's hand would tighten on Chloe's arm, not in comfort, but in control. It was too perfect. Their grief was a well-rehearsed play, and I was the only member of the audience who knew the script was a lie. That memory, that loud, clanging memory, was what the problem comment at the barbecue had finally unlocked. It connected the dots, the condescension, the gaslighting, the dismissal. It wasn't just about them being tired of a grieving old woman. It was about managing a witness who, until now, had been too lost in her own sorrow to see the truth that was right in front of her. The house wasn't just quiet. It was being silenced. And the loudest silence of all came from the basement. The basement had always been Robert's kingdom, the scent of pine and cedar and old machinery. The walls were lined with tools, each one cleaned and hung in its proper place. There were half-finished projects everywhere. A rocking horse for a grandchild we never had, a beautiful inlaid box, a set of bookshelves. It was a place of creation, of tangible things, of life. Now, it was Mark's sanctuary. And it was sealed. The simple wooden door with its old brass knob was gone. In its place was a heavy, steel-framed door, the kind you'd see in a laboratory. And on the wall next to it, where a simple keyhole should have been, was a sleek, black digital keypad. It had no brand name, just a smooth, featureless surface that glowed with a faint blue light. It looked alien, a piece of corporate high-tech grafted onto the heart of our home. The first time I saw it, about a month after Robert died, I asked Chloe about it. She was in the kitchen, tapping away at an expensive-looking laptop, designing a mood board for a client that was mostly shades of gray. "The basement door," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "It's different." She didn't look up. "Oh, yeah. Mark had it installed. For work." "For work? What work does he do in the basement?" She finally looked at me, her expression a careful blend of patience and weariness. "It's for Innovatech, Mom. Server maintenance. They have him storing some backup servers here. It's all very sensitive, high-security stuff. Company policy. He could get in big trouble if the hardware was compromised." The explanation was smooth, practiced. It sounded plausible if you didn't think about it too hard. "Servers?" I asked. "In our basement? Why?" It's just temporary. They're building a new data center. Look, it's boring tech stuff you wouldn't understand, she said, her eyes flicking back to her screen, a clear signal that the conversation was over. You wouldn't understand. The three most dismissive words in the English language. But I did understand some things. I understood the low, constant hum that now vibrated up through the floorboards of the house. It was most noticeable at night, when the world was quiet. A deep electric thrum, the sound of powerful machines working ceaselessly. It was a constant physical reminder of the secret locked away beneath my feet. Sometimes, I would lie in bed and feel it in my bones, the house's new, wrong heartbeat. One evening, Mark came into the kitchen while I was making tea. The hum seemed louder than usual. The servers, I said, testing the word. They're quite noisy tonight. He smiled that politician's smile and came over to pat my hand, his touch light and dismissive. Now, don't you worry about that, Elizabeth. It's just the cooling fans. They have to keep the processors from overheating, all perfectly normal. His tone. It was the tone that did it. The one I was starting to hear more and more often. The one a parent uses on a frightened child who thinks there's a monster under the bed. The one a doctor uses on a confused elderly patient. It was designed to soothe, but all it did was patronize, to invalidate. I started to test them. I'd accidentally leave a magazine near the basement door. It would be moved. I'd ask Chloe a question about the servers when one of her friends was over, just to see her reaction. She would flush with anger and change the subject, shooting me a look that was pure venom. One afternoon, I was alone in the house. The silence was pressing in, and the hum from below seemed to be calling to me. I went and stood before the new door. I reached out and touched the keypad. It was cold, smooth as glass. I entered Robert's birthday, 081954. A red light flashed and a low error beep sounded. I tried my birthday, my anniversary, Chloe's birthday. Nothing, of course not. It was foolish. I heard the front door open. Hello? I'm home. It was Mark, back early. My heart leaped into my throat. I spun around from the door as he came into the hallway. He stopped, his briefcase in one hand, his keys in the other. He saw where I was standing. He saw my hand, still hovering near the keypad. His smile didn't falter, but it became something sharp and cold, like a shard of ice. Elizabeth, Elizabeth, he said, his voice a soft, chiding croon. What are we going to do with you? He walked towards me, his footsteps silent on the runner. He didn't seem angry. He seemed disappointed, like I was a pet that had misbehaved. Your imagination is running away with you again, he said, stopping in front of me, forcing me to look up at him. I've told you. Chloe's told you. It's just computers. Boring, boring computers. Nothing to worry your pretty little head about. He reached out and patted my cheek, a gesture that was meant to be affectionate but felt like a threat. We need you to be safe, Elizabeth. We need you to be well. Getting all worked up over a noisy fan isn't good for your health. You know your heart isn't what it used to be. The veiled reference to Robert hung in the air between us, toxic and suffocating. He was equating my curiosity with illness, with fragility. He was building my cage, bar by bar, and the name of the cage was concern. He looked past me at the door. This lock is here for a reason. For my job. For our security. For your security. I need you to promise me you'll leave it alone. Can you do that for me? I looked into his eyes, those clear, blue, untroubled eyes. I saw the calculation there, the absolute confidence. He believed he was in total control. He believed I was a doddering old fool, a problem that could be managed with condescending pats and gentle threats. And so I did what he expected me to do. I let my shoulders slump. I looked down at the floor. I made myself seem small, confused, and defeated. Yes, Mark, I whispered. I'm sorry. I won't touch it again. That's a good girl, he said, and the smile that spread across his face was one of pure, triumphant satisfaction. He turned and walked toward the kitchen, his posture relaxed, the victor of a battle I had just intentionally lost. I stood there in the hallway, my heart hammering not with fear, but with a cold, clear purpose. He thought he was the architect of my prison. He had no idea I was the one who was now studying the blueprints. He had locked a door, but he had unlocked me, and I would find a key. After the barbecue, the house became a different kind of prison. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of a tomb, and I was the ghost rattling my own chains. My only tether to the world, to my own sanity, was Ava. She was 16, a whirlwind of sharp intelligence and digital fluency that felt like a foreign language to me. She didn't see me as a problem or a burden. She saw me. She would sit with me on the worn floral sofa, her phone a bright rectangle in the dim light, showing me videos of dancing dogs or bizarre cooking trends, a small, desperate attempt to pull me into the current of the world. One evening, the house was particularly quiet. Mark and Chloe were out at some industry dinner, leaving behind a wake of expensive perfume and unspoken tension. Ava was curled up at the other end of the sofa, her thumb flying across her screen. The rhythmic flicking sound was a small comfort. Then she stopped. "Whoa," she murmured, her eyes wide. "This is so creepy, Grandma. You have to see this." I leaned over. She held the phone out to me. On the screen, a woman with puffy, red-rimmed eyes was speaking to the camera. Her living room was immaculate, sterile, like a show home. "I didn't know how I was going to go on," the woman said, her voice trembling with practiced sincerity. "Losing David. It was like the sun went out." She turned her head slightly, and the camera panned to a large monitor mounted on the wall. On it was a man. He was smiling, a gentle, understanding smile. He looked real, eerily real. The lighting, the subtle shift of his shoulders, the way his eyes seemed to track the weeping woman. "It's okay, Sarah," the digital man said. His voice was warm, a perfect, synthesized balm. "I'm still here, in a way." "It's called Elysian Echoes," Ava whispered, reading the text overlaid on the video. "It's like a digital ghost service. They make a perfect AI copy of someone who died, using their old emails, videos, social media, so you can talk to them." My blood ran cold. I wasn't listening to Ava anymore. I was staring at the man on the screen, David. His last name was Miller, David Miller. He had worked with Mark at Innovatech, a junior programmer. I'd met him once or twice, a nice, quiet man who was obsessed with rock climbing. The woman on the screen, his widow, continued her testimonial. "The service has been a lifeline. To hear his voice, to ask his advice. It's like he never left. When he died in that tragic hiking accident last month, I thought my world was over, but Elysian Echoes gave me back a piece of him." A hiking accident. The words echoed in the silent room, bouncing off the walls that Robert had built. A cold dread, thick and oily, washed over me. It started in my stomach and spread through my veins until my fingertips were numb. David Miller, Mark's former colleague, dead, in an accident. And now his grieving widow was the star of a commercial for a company that just happened to be Mark's secret new obsession. The air in the room became thin, hard to breathe. I felt Ava's concerned eyes on me. "Grandma, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I had. And I was beginning to suspect he wasn't the only one. The discovery of that video lit a fire in me. The smoldering resentment, the quiet, formless suspicion. It now had a name. Elysian Echoes. My questions stopped being vague musings about my grief. They became surgical, pointed. "Chloe," I asked one morning in the kitchen, my voice carefully neutral. "I saw the strangest thing online. A company that makes digital copies of dead people. And the man in the video, David Miller, didn't he work with Mark?" Chloe didn't look up from her phone, where she was approving a grocery delivery. "I guess. The tech world is small, Mom. People die. It's sad." Her dismissal was so complete, so effortless. It was an art form. A few days later, I approached Mark as he was leaving for the day, his briefcase a leather shield. "Mark, that company, Elysian Echoes. The technology seems incredibly advanced. Is that what you're working on in the basement?" He stopped, his hand on the doorknob. He turned slowly, and the charming mask he wore for the world was gone. For a split second, I saw the man underneath, cold, annoyed, dangerous. "Elizabeth," he said, and the way he used my name was a warning. "You need to stop worrying about things that don't concern you. It's not healthy. You're getting confused." I didn't back down. Robert was worried too, the night before he died. He said he found something on your computer, something unethical. He was going to talk to you about it. That was it. The final thread I was willing to pull. Mark's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. He just held my gaze for a moment, and in his eyes, I saw not just annoyance, but calculation. Then he turned and left, the front door clicking shut, with a sound like a verdict. The response was swift, and it was brutal. It came a week later. A Tuesday. The doorbell rang. It wasn't a package delivery. It was a man in a cheap suit holding a stiff, formal envelope. He asked me to confirm my name and then handed it to me. I didn't even have to open it to know what it was. The weight of it was the weight of a cage door swinging shut. Mark and Chloe were petitioning the court for legal guardianship over me. That evening, they sat me down on the sofa, the same spot where Ava and I had watched the video. They sat opposite me in matching armchairs, a united front of calm, reasonable concern. It was a performance. "Mom," Chloe began, her voice dripping with counterfeit sympathy, "we're worried about you. We love you, but you haven't been yourself since Dad passed." "You're forgetting things," Mark chimed in, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "You're getting agitated, confused. You're making strange accusations. It's classic for someone your age." I held the legal documents in my lap. The paper was cold against my skin. "You think I'm crazy," I said, my voice a dead thing. "We don't think you're crazy, Elizabeth," Mark corrected gently. "The term is cognitive decline. We have a doctor's report. Dr. Evans, a very respected geriatric psychiatrist. He agrees that you're showing signs of advancing dementia, paranoid delusions." Dr. Evans, a name I vaguely recognized from one of Mark's golf outings. A friend, of course. The documents were a masterpiece of legal gaslighting. My grief was reframed as prolonged emotional instability. My questions about Mark's business were paranoid fixations. My memory of Robert's last words was a confabulation, a symptom of a mind that could no longer distinguish between reality and fantasy. They were petitioning for control of my affairs, my finances, Robert's estate, which was still entirely in my name. They were building a legal case to erase me, to turn me into an unreliable witness, a confused old woman whose ravings could be safely ignored. The problem was becoming a liability, and this was their elegant, cruel solution. To silence me, not with a threat, but with a diagnosis. In court, I would be nothing. "This is for your own good, Mom," Chloe said, her eyes pleading, but her posture rigid. "We just want to take care of you." I looked from my daughter's face to my son-in-law's. The loving concern, the polished lies. I saw it all with a terrifying clarity. They weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to bury me while I was still breathing. That night, after they went to bed, convinced they had successfully neutralized me, I crept to Ava's room. Her light was still on. She was sitting at her desk, coding something, her face illuminated by the complex dance of characters on her screen. I didn't have to say a word. She saw the look on my face, the legal papers clutched in my hand. She stood up, her expression hardening from teenage nonchalance into a fierce protective anger that mirrored my own. "They didn't," she whispered. "They did," I said, my voice finally breaking. "They think they've won." Ava shook her head, a dark fire in her eyes. "No, they just declared war." She looked at me, her mind already working, already seeing the patterns I couldn't. "He's arrogant, Grandma. Mark, he thinks he's the smartest person in any room. Arrogant people get sloppy. His password, it's the date he pitched the Elysian project to his first investor. I'd bet my life on it." She was right. 2 nights later, while Mark and Chloe were at another of their interminable networking events, we made our move. The house was silent again, but this time the silence was our ally. It was a cloak. We crept into Mark's home office, the one he used for his day job. His personal laptop was on the desk, sleeping. "I can get past the login," Ava whispered, her fingers flying over her own tablet. "But once I'm in, the system will log the access. If he checks, he'll know someone was on it." "We'll have 5 minutes, Max, before I have to wipe the trace." 5 minutes, I breathed. It felt like a lifetime, and no time at all. Ava worked her magic. The screen flickered to life, revealing Mark's pristine, organized desktop. Folders were neatly labeled. Finances. Innovatech. Personal. It was the desktop of a man who believed his secrets were perfectly safe. "We don't go for the main files," I said, my mind racing. "That's what he'd expect. That's where the heavy encryption will be. Go for the trash." Ava's eyes lit up. "The digital dumpster. Good idea." She clicked the icon. A window opened, filled with deleted files. Most of it was junk. Old drafts, articles, system files. But then my eyes caught it. A video file with a clinical, sterile name, V. Intake Miller A. Dell. Deleted, but not yet scrubbed. "That one," I whispered, my finger trembling as I pointed to the screen. Ava clicked it. The video player opened. It wasn't a testimonial this time. This was raw footage. The camera was shaky, as if held by someone walking through a house. The woman from the Elysian Echoes ad, Sarah Miller, was sitting on a sofa, looking nervous. She was talking to an off-screen voice, Mark's voice. "Just tell me about him, Sarah," Mark's voice said, smooth and reassuring. "His habits, the little things you loved. What made David, David?" The footage was chilling, but it was the other files in the trash that stopped my heart. They weren't videos. They were documents. A floor plan of the Miller's house, with arrows pointing to the back patio and the trail access behind their property. A list of David Miller's known allergies, a copy of his life insurance policy, with Sarah as the sole beneficiary, and photos, dozens of them. Photos of their home, their family, their life, all time-stamped weeks before David's tragic hiking accident. My breath hitched in my throat. I grabbed Ava's arm. He wasn't just recording her grief, Ava. He was researching. He was planning. We stared at the screen, at the cold, methodical collection of a man's entire life, compiled like an instruction manual for its deconstruction. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Mark wasn't providing a service for the grieving. He was creating them. He was a manufacturer of sorrow, a purveyor of bespoke tragedy. "Get out," I rasped to Ava. "Now." She wiped the logs, her face pale, but her movements certain. We slipped out of the office, leaving no trace. But the ghost was no longer just in the machine. It was in the room with us now. It was in the very air we breathed. The video was a crack in the wall, but I knew the foundation of Mark's empire had to be somewhere deeper. The casual way he'd orchestrated David Miller's death suggested it wasn't his first time. It was too polished, too confident. He had a system, and systems leave a trail. For the next week, Ava became my clandestine partner. By day, I played the part they'd assigned me, a frail, slightly confused old woman, nodding absently, asking no difficult questions. I let them see what they wanted to see. A problem being managed. By night, Ava worked. She didn't try a direct assault on Mark's laptop again. Instead, she went through the house's network router, a back door he'd never thought to secure. He'd protected his castle, but left the sewer grate unlocked. "He's running a private server from the basement," she told me one night, her face lit by the glow of her screen in her darkened bedroom. "Heavily encrypted. It's where he stores the core company data. It's almost impossible to get into." "Almost?" I asked, my heart pounding. A grim smile touched her lips. "He's a good programmer, Grandma, but he's not a god. He's arrogant. He built his own encryption, based on an old gaming code he wrote in college. He thinks nobody is smart enough to figure it out, but he posted fragments of that old code on a forum 10 years ago, bragging about it. For 3 nights, she worked, piecing together Mark's digital hubris. She wrote a key, a skeleton key forged from his own ego. On the 4th night, she broke through. "I'm in," she whispered. The victory in her voice was overshadowed by a deep-seated dread. The file system that appeared on her screen was a labyrinth. Folders named Echo Core, Client Data, Financials. But one file stood apart, in the root directory. It was protected by another layer of security, but its name was simple, biblical, and utterly terrifying. Genesis. It took Ava another hour to peel back the final layer. It was like watching a surgeon at work, precise and unflinching. Finally, the file opened. It wasn't a business plan. It wasn't code. It was a list. A simple, horrifying ledger written in a plain text file. It was a list of names. Each name was followed by a date and a cause of death, written with the chilling detachment of a quarterly report. 1. David Miller, 09/22/25. Hiking accident. 2. Annalise Porter, 07/16/25. Allergic reaction. 3. Marcus Thorne, 05/04/25. Brake failure. And on it went. 12 names. 12 manufactured tragedies. 12 customers for Elysian Echoes. My eyes scanned the list. A roll call of the dead, each one a foundation stone in Mark's monument to his own greed. I felt sick. This was the blueprint of his evil. And then I saw it, at the very top of the list. The first entry, the one that had come before all the others. Product 0. The name was Robert Hale, my Robert. The date was 10/14/24, the day he died. The cause of death read, coronary event. The world didn't just tilt, it shattered. The floor fell away, the air turned to glass, and I was falling through the pieces. Robert, my husband, the man I had loved for 40 years. His death wasn't a tragedy, it was a launch party. He wasn't a victim of a failing heart. He was the prototype, Product 0. Mark hadn't just built a business on the back of my grief. He had launched his entire enterprise by murdering my husband, by murdering Chloe's father. I stared at the screen, at the 2 words that rewrote my entire life. Coronary event. So simple, so clean, so easy to fake with the right knowledge, the right untraceable substance. Robert had found something on his computer. He was going to confront him, and Mark had silenced him, not just to hide a secret, but to test a theory, to see if he could do it, to see if he could create the perfect, inconsolable grief that would become his first and most valuable commodity. My grief. Ava put her hand on my shoulder. I didn't even realize I was shaking until her touch steadied me. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep, too cold for tears. It was a block of ice in my chest, and a terrible, clarifying rage was beginning to form around it. I had to know. I had to know if my daughter, my only child, was a victim in this or a partner. I held on to a sliver of hope, a desperate, foolish prayer that she was just blind, just another person fooled by Mark's charm. I printed the list. The cheap paper felt obscene in my hands, too flimsy to bear the weight of so much death. The next morning, I found Chloe in the kitchen. She was standing at the marble island, scrolling through designs for a new pool house on a tablet, the picture of domestic bliss, bought and paid for with blood. My hands shook as I walked toward her. I held the single sheet of paper out. "Chloe." My voice was a stranger's, thin and brittle. "I need you to look at this." She glanced up, annoyed at the interruption. She took the paper, her eyes scanning the list with a casual disinterest that quickly sharpened into something else. Something unreadable. She read all 12 names. She read the causes of death. She read the entry at the very top. I watched her face, praying for a flicker of horror, of shock, of grief. I prayed for my daughter to reappear from behind the mask she now wore. "Look what he did," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Look what he did to your father." Chloe placed the paper carefully on the counter, smoothing it with one hand. She looked at the list for a long moment. Then she raised her head and looked at me. The warmth that had once defined her, the light in her eyes that I had cherished since the day she was born, was gone. It was replaced by a chilling, absolute pragmatism, a coldness that mirrored her husband's. "Dad was weak," she said, her voice completely flat, devoid of any emotion. "He lived in the past. He wanted to work in his dusty workshop and pretend the world wasn't changing. Mark gave me a future. He gave us all of this." She made a sweeping gesture with her hand, indicating the perfect house, the expensive appliances, the life built on a foundation of bone and digital ghosts. My hope died. It was a swift, clean death. "He murdered your father, Chloe." "Dad was going to ruin everything," she replied, her voice hardening. "For some silly little principle. He would have dragged Mark down, and me with him. He made his choice. I made mine." She picked up the list, folded it neatly, and held it out to me. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "You need to stop this, Mother. You need to accept the guardianship. It's for your own good. Stop digging. There's nothing to find but trouble." The betrayal was absolute. It was a physical force, knocking the last of my strength from me. It wasn't just Mark, it was them, a team. My daughter had looked at the future Mark offered her, weighed it against her father's life, and made a business decision. I was standing in a room with a stranger who wore my daughter's face. I was not a mother grieving a lost husband. I was an obstacle, a loose end, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The door to Chloe's room clicked shut, and the sound was more final than a gunshot. It was the sound of a lock turning in my own heart, sealing away the daughter I knew, leaving behind this stranger, this creature of ambition and ice. I stood in the hallway, the polished floorboards cold beneath my feet. The house was silent again, but the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of their victory, their contempt, their absolute certainty that I was finished. The legal papers they'd filed felt like a physical weight, a shroud they were trying to wrap around my mind. Senile, paranoid, delusional. Words chosen like scalpels, meant to excise me from my own life, to make me a non-person, a ghost in my own home. And in that moment, in that cold, silent hallway, a thought took root. A ghost. They see me as a ghost already, a rambling, harmless specter haunting the corners of their new, shiny life. Fine. If they wanted a ghost, I would give them one they would never, ever forget. I walked not to my room, but to Ava's. Her door was slightly ajar, a sliver of blue light from her laptop screen cutting through the darkness. I didn't knock. I pushed it open. She was hunched over her keyboard, her face illuminated, her expression a mask of fury and grief. She looked up, startled, her eyes red. "Grandma? What did she say?" I closed the door behind me, shutting out the rest of the house. I looked at my granddaughter, this brilliant, fierce girl who was my only tether to the world I once knew. The only person who saw me, not the caricature Mark and Chloe had created. "She chose him," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the tears I thought would come. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard knot in my chest. She chose the money, the future he promised her. Ava's face crumpled for a second, then hardened again. I knew it. I knew she wasn't just going along with it. She's one of them. "Yes," I said. "She is." I sat on the edge of her bed. The air in the room was thick with the low hum of electronics and unspoken rage. "They went to a lawyer, Ava, a doctor. They have a file. They are going to have me declared incompetent. They will take control of Robert's estate. They will put me in a home, and no one will ever listen to a single word I say about what they did." "We can fight it," she said, her voice rising. "We can go to the police right now. We have that video from the trash file. It's something." I shook my head slowly. "What is it?" "A deleted video of a woman who died of a supposed allergic reaction. Found by the senile mother-in-law and her teenage granddaughter on a private laptop you illegally accessed. They'll tear us apart, Ava. They will use their petition for guardianship against us. They'll say I'm obsessed, that I'm inventing conspiracies. Mark's friend, the doctor, will testify. My own daughter will testify. Who do you think a judge will believe? Her shoulders slumped. The fight went out of her. She knew I was right. We were checkmated. The system, the very structure of law and order we were supposed to trust, had been bought and paid for before we even got to the board. I leaned forward, my hands on my knees. I looked directly into her eyes, letting her see the new thing that was taking shape behind mine. It wasn't despair. It was something harder, colder. The system won't give us justice, I said, and my voice was steady for the first time in what felt like a year. It was the voice of a woman who had passed through the fire and come out the other side as something else. So we won't use the system. We'll use theirs. We'll use his creation, his ambition, his own vile technology against him. Ava looked at me, confused. What are you talking about? Elysian Echoes, I said. The name tasted like poison. He sells ghosts to the grieving. He creates a digital copy of the dead to comfort the living. It's a brilliant, monstrous idea. I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle in the space between us. I need you to help me build a ghost, Ava. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. A ghost? My ghost, I clarified. A perfect copy, a digital echo of Elizabeth Clark. We are going to feed it everything, my voice, my memories, my secrets. And then, we are going to set it loose. The last of her youthful hopes seemed to drain away, replaced by a chilling understanding that mirrored my own. She was seeing the path I was laying out. It wasn't a path to justice. It was a path to ruin. What's the plan, Grandma? She whispered, her voice barely audible. The plan, I said, feeling a grim smile touch my lips for the first time, is no longer about survival. It's not about convincing anyone. It's about methodical, meticulous, and absolute annihilation. Ava became my shadow, my operative, a silent phantom in the house where she had grown up. The first step was surveillance. She ordered the devices online using a prepaid card and had them delivered to a pickup locker miles away. Micro cameras, no bigger than the head of a pin, a series of audio bugs that could be hidden in plain sight. She was a natural. While Mark was at Innovatech, basking in the glow of his impending success, and Chloe was at the gym or shopping, Ava moved through the house like a ghost herself. One pinhead camera went into the spine of a book on the shelf opposite Mark's desk in his home office, the one he used when he wasn't down in Robert's sealed-off workshop. Another went into the frame of a landscape painting in the main living room. A third, the most important one, was embedded in the base of the digital clock on the mantelpiece, giving it a clear view of the entire dining area where we had our tense, silent meals. With the stage set, I began my performance. It was the hardest role I'd ever had to play because it was the one they expected. I let my hair go uncombed some mornings. I'd wander into a room and pretend to forget why I was there. I'd misplace my reading glasses only to have them found on top of my head. I became the doddering old woman they were describing in their legal documents. I let their smug, pitying looks wash over me, and I absorbed them, turning their condescension into fuel. The real performance began at the dinner table. Night after night, I would set the bait. I stopped being silent. I started talking, my voice wandering, my memories failing. One evening, Mark was boasting about a new contract. He was expansive, confident, pouring himself a second glass of expensive wine. "It's incredible, Chloe," he was saying. "They're talking about a valuation that could put us in the 9-figure range within the year." I looked up from my plate, a vaguely confused expression on my face. 9 figures. That's a lot of zeros. Robert always said you had to earn your zeros, one by one. He was so strong. I sighed, looking at Mark, my eyes slightly unfocused. It's funny, isn't it? A man that strong, a man who cycled 15 miles every morning, having a heart attack, just like that. Mark's smile tightened. "Mother, we've been over this. It was a tragedy, a shock to us all." "Yes, a shock," I murmured, turning my gaze to Robert's photograph on the mantelpiece, directly in line with the hidden camera. He was so worked up that day before his accident. He'd found something on your computer, he told me, something about your project. He said it was fundamentally wrong. He was going to talk to you about it that night. I looked back at Mark, my expression one of pure, innocent confusion. "Did he ever get the chance to talk to you, Mark? I can't seem to remember." The air went cold. Chloe shot me a look of pure venom, but I pretended not to see it. I just looked at Mark, waiting. "He was stressed," Mark said, his voice clipped. "He was projecting. The project was fine. His heart just gave out." I nodded slowly. "Gave out? Yes. So many things just give out." Night after night, I did this. I needled them. I pricked their conscience with tiny, sharp questions dressed up in the guise of senility. I'd talk about the colleague of Mark's, the one from the Elysian Echoes advertisement. "Such a shame about Richard," I'd say, stirring my tea. "A healthy man like that falling off a mountain. He was so careful. Did you know he was on your list, Mark? Your special project list?" I was pushing them, baiting them, stretching their patience to its breaking point. They started having hushed, furious arguments in the kitchen when they thought I was napping. Ava's audio bugs picked up every whispered word. "She knows. She doesn't know anything. She's losing her mind." Then why does she keep bringing it up? The break came on a Tuesday night. I had accidentally spilled a glass of water on some of Mark's papers he'd left on the dining table. He came down to find me dabbing at them uselessly with a napkin, muttering apologies. His face was a thundercloud. Chloe rushed in and pulled me away, her grip on my arm painfully tight. "For God's sake, Mother, can't you do anything right?" "Look at this mess!" They got me settled in the living room and then retreated to the dining area to assess the damage, believing I was out of earshot and lost in my own fog. The camera in the clock on the mantelpiece had a perfect view. The audio was crystal clear. "This is untenable," Mark hissed, his voice a low, vicious snarl. He wasn't speaking to Chloe. He was speaking to the room, to the universe. "We have to accelerate the guardianship. I can't have her stumbling around, destroying things, running her mouth." "What if she's not just stumbling, Mark?" Chloe's voice was sharp with fear. "What if she remembers more than we think?" There was a moment of heavy silence. I could picture him standing there, his jaw clenched, the mask of the charming tech genius stripped away to reveal the monster beneath. "It doesn't matter what she remembers," he finally snarled, and his words hit me like a physical blow, even from across the room. "The old fool had to go. Robert. He would have ruined everything. He was a sentimental dinosaur, stuck in the past. He saw Genesis, and he was going to go to the police." I held my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. Chloe's reply came, not with shock or horror, but with cold, bitter agreement. "He was weak. He would have held us back. He would have held me back. This is our future, Mark, not his." "Damn right it is," Mark said. "And she is not going to get in the way of it. No one is." In her room, Ava captured it all. The video, the audio, the final damning proof. A confession, delivered in the comfort of their stolen home, convinced of their own invincibility. It was the keystone of my plan. While I was playing the fool for them, my nights were spent in secret diligence. My room became a recording studio. With a high-fidelity microphone Ava had procured, I began to feed my ghost. I sat in my armchair, the house silent around me, and I spoke. I told stories. I started with my childhood, my parents, the town I grew up in. I described the taste of my mother's apple pie, the smell of rain on hot asphalt in the summer. I recounted meeting Robert, our first date, the clumsy proposal, the overwhelming joy of our wedding day. I talked about holding Chloe for the first time, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine. I recorded the good memories, the pure ones, infusing the AI with the woman I had been. Then I recorded the pain. I described the slow, creeping distance I felt from Chloe as she grew older, her fascination with Mark's ambition, her dismissal of our simple life. I spoke of Robert's worry, the lines that appeared around his eyes in that final year. I recounted, in minute, forensic detail, the day he died. The way Mark had stood there, perfectly composed. The way Chloe's grief had seemed rehearsed, a performance for the paramedics. I recorded my suspicions, my fear, my loneliness. I poured every ounce of my life, my love, my rage, and my sorrow into that microphone. I was giving my ghost a soul, a vengeful, articulate soul forged in grief and betrayal. I was not just creating a copy. I was building a weapon and loading it with the ammunition of my own life. The day I chose was a Thursday, a gray, overcast morning that matched the mood in my soul. The final pieces were in place. Ava had made contact with a nurse at the local hospital. It was a long shot, a desperate hope, but it had paid off. Ava had found her on an online forum for caregivers, a place of shared frustration and quiet desperation. The nurse, a woman named Maria, had posted about her own grandmother, a victim of financial abuse at the hands of a trusted relative, a story that ended in a lonely, state-run facility. When Ava, using an anonymous profile, reached out and told her a carefully edited version of my story, Maria had agreed to help. It was a risk, a massive one for her, but she saw her own family's tragedy in mine. She was our angel, our crucial, unpredictable variable. The plan required a sacrifice, a down payment in pain. I chose the main staircase. It was a beautiful feature of the house, polished oak that Robert had restored himself, board by board. Now, it would be my stage. I stood at the top, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I looked down at the gleaming hardwood of the entryway floor. This was the point of no return. I thought of Robert. I thought of the daughter I had lost. I thought of Ava, my brave, brilliant girl, waiting in her room, her fingers poised over a keyboard. This was for them. This was for me. My scream was not an act. It was a primal, gut-wrenching sound torn from the deepest part of my being. A scream of grief, of rage, of everything I had lost. I let my body go limp and pitched myself forward. The fall was a chaotic explosion of sensation. The sickening weightlessness, the violent crack as my shoulder hit the banister, the sharp, concussive impact as my head struck the wall. The world became a kaleidoscope of pain and splintered light. The thud of my body hitting the polished floor below was sickeningly final. I lay there, the taste of blood in my mouth, my vision swimming. I heard their footsteps pounding down the hall. Mark and Chloe. They rushed into view, their faces a perfect mask of shock. But behind the shock, I saw it. In the flicker of their eyes, in the slight downturn of their mouths, I saw the morbid, sickening spark of opportunity. The problem was finally, blessedly, solving itself. "Oh my God, Mother!" Chloe shrieked, the sound theatrical, unconvincing. "Don't touch her," Mark commanded, his voice tight with false authority. "Call 911, now!" As Chloe fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking with what I knew was adrenaline and not fear, Ava was already in motion. In her room, she hit send. A single encrypted audio file was uploaded to an anonymous tip line for the local police department. It was a masterpiece of digital manipulation. Using the hours of recordings I'd made, Ava had spliced together my voice. It was garbled, filled with static, sounding like a pocket-dialed call made in a moment of terror. My voice, panicked and frail, saying just 5 words. "Mark, get away." The stairs. He pushed. The paramedics arrived in a scream of sirens. They were professional, efficient. They strapped me to a backboard, my body protesting with fresh waves of agony. As they carried me out of the house, my house for the last time, I kept my eyes closed. I let my body remain limp. I was no longer Elizabeth Clark, the troublesome mother-in-law. I was a victim, a piece of evidence. At the hospital, the chaos of the emergency room swirled around me. Doctors and nurses shouted acronyms and vital signs. Through the haze of pain, I felt a hand gently squeeze my own. I risked opening my eyes a fraction. A woman with kind, dark eyes and a nurse's name tag that read Maria was looking down at me. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She was real. Our angel was real. The next few hours were a blur of tests, X-rays, and hushed conversations outside my room. Mark and Chloe were there, playing the part of the distraught family, fielding questions from a stern-faced detective who had received the anonymous tip. From what I could gather, their story was flawless. It was a tragic accident. Mother was confused. She must have slipped. Later that night, Maria came into my room. She closed the door quietly. "The police are gone for now," she whispered. "They're suspicious, but your daughter and son-in-law are putting on a good show." She checked my chart. "You have a severe concussion, a fractured collarbone, and 3 broken ribs. You're lucky you're not dead." "Sometimes luck is just another word for a plan," I rasped, my throat raw. She smiled faintly. "Your granddaughter is incredible. The transfer is arranged. A private ambulance is being dispatched from a long-term care facility 2 counties over. The paperwork is creative, a clerical error. You'll be logged as Jane Doe, transferred due to overcrowding." She paused. "By morning, as far as this hospital is concerned, your condition will have taken a turn for the worse. By noon, you will have passed away. Your family will be notified. Your body will be sent to the morgue, where another clerical error will occur. The paperwork for an unclaimed body from last week will be attached to your file. You, Elizabeth Clark, will be officially gone." I looked at this woman, this stranger who was risking her career, her entire life, for me. "Why?" I whispered. Her expression hardened with a memory. "Because my grandmother died alone in a room that smelled of bleach, believing her family had forgotten her, while her son drove a new car he'd bought with her life savings. Nobody fought for her. So tonight, I fight for you." And so, in the dead of night, I died. I was wheeled out of the hospital, a sheet over my head, and disappeared into the darkness. To the world, to the police, and to the 2 people celebrating their final victory back in my house, Elizabeth Clark was gone. The ghost was free. The Innovatech Global Symposium was the culmination of Mark's life's work. It was held in a cavernous convention center, a temple of glass and steel dedicated to the gods of technology. Thousands of people were there, investors in tailored suits, tech journalists with hungry eyes, developers and competitors. It was the coronation he had always dreamed of. He stood on the massive stage, a single figure bathed in a brilliant white spotlight. Behind him, a screen the size of a building displayed the sleek, elegant logo of his company, Elysian Echoes. He was a master on that stage, confident, charismatic, visionary. He spoke of a future without the sting of loss, a world where grief could be managed, monetized, and made beautiful. He was selling them a dream, and they were buying every word. "For 2 years," he said, his voice resonating through the auditorium, "Elysian Echoes has allowed you to hear the voices of those you've lost. We have given you a comfort once thought impossible, but that was just the beginning." He paced the stage, a picture of triumph. "Today, we are moving beyond simply hearing. Today, we are ready to see. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the future of remembrance. I give you Elysian Echoes 2.0. On the giant screen behind him, a beautiful, cinematic advertisement began to play. It showed a grieving husband interacting with a holographic image of his deceased wife. It was powerful. It was moving. It was a lie built on a foundation of corpses. The audience was captivated. Some were wiping away tears. As the ad finished and the screen faded to the company logo, Mark raised his arms, ready to accept the thunderous applause. But the applause never came. Instead, the screen flickered, a jolt of digital static, like a crack in the universe. Mark frowned, glancing over his shoulder. The logo dissolved, not into black, but into a familiar face. My face. It wasn't a photograph. It was me. A perfect, high-resolution digital rendering. My hair was neat, my expression serene, my eyes clear and looking directly out at the thousands of stunned faces in the audience. I was the ghost in his machine, the product he never intended to release. A collective gasp went through the crowd. In the front row, Chloe's face went white as a sheet. Mark stared, frozen, his smile locked in a grotesque rictus of disbelief. Then my ghost spoke. My voice, The one I had so carefully recorded filled the auditorium, calm, clear, and amplified to an ungodly volume. "Good evening," I said. My digital lips moved in perfect sync. "My son-in-law Mark is a pioneer. He is a visionary. He is the man who created me." A confused murmur rippled through the audience. They thought this was part of the presentation, a clever, if macabre, marketing trick. "He calls his product Elysian Echoes," my ghost continued, its voice impossibly calm, "a comfort for the grieving. But to create a customer, you first need a loss. You need a body. Mark is very, very good at creating bodies." The air in the room turned to ice. Mark was frantically gesturing to the technicians in the wings, his face contorted in a mask of pure panic. But nothing happened. Ava's control was absolute. "Let me introduce you to his first success," my ghost said. "His prototype. He called it Product Zero." The screen behind my image split. On one side, my serene face remained. On the other, a name appeared in stark white letters, Robert Clark. Underneath it, a date, and beside it, the official cause of death, coronary event. And then, a new line of text appeared, glowing in a blood-red font. Actual cause, digoxin poisoning, sourced and administered by Mark. Gasps turned into shouts of horror. The press section erupted, cameras flashing like machine gun fire. "Mark is a meticulous record keeper," my ghost narrated, its voice never wavering. "He kept a ledger. He called it Genesis." And then the audio played. The secret recording from the dining room, amplified for the world to hear. Mark's vicious snarl. "The old fool had to go. He would have ruined everything." Followed by Chloe's cold, clear agreement. "He was weak. He would have held us back." Chloe screamed, a raw animal sound of pure terror. She tried to run but was immediately swarmed by journalists. My ghost continued, relentless. "Robert was just the beginning. The beta test. Once the model was proven, Mark expanded his client base. A new name appeared on the screen. Richard Lund. Cause of death, mountaineering accident, actual cause, tampered harness, another name. Eleanor Vance. Cause of death, sudden allergic reaction, actual cause, peanut oil introduced to food. The list scrolled on, a horrifying roll call of the dead. 12 names, 12 accidents, 12 families Mark had shattered to build his empire. My voice from beyond the grave narrated each crime, one by one, a calm, clear indictment using the very platform of his success to broadcast his damnation. My ghost's serene face finally looked directly at the camera, as if making eye contact with every single person in the room, and with Mark himself, who now stood paralyzed on stage, a broken statue of a man. "He didn't just create digital echoes," I said, my voice delivering the final, devastating blow. "He created the ghosts first." The screen went black. The chaos was immediate. It was absolute. It was the sound of an empire of lies and bodies crashing down to earth. The noise was the first thing I remember from the other side. Not the roar of an explosion or the scream of a siren, but the clipped, urgent cadence of a news anchor. It was a sound that had become background music to my life for the past year, a constant low-grade hum of disaster and politics. But this time, it was different. This time, the disaster was mine. The sound seeped from a small television in the corner of a sterile, anonymous room. A room that smelled of bleach and fresh linens, a place where Elizabeth Hale had ceased to exist. On the screen, I saw Mark's face. Not the confident, smirking face from the Innovatech conference, but a grainy, overexposed photo, the kind they use when someone is either a suspect or a victim. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "GriefTech CEO arrested in shocking murder-for-profit scheme." The fallout wasn't just a storm, it was biblical, a deluge of information and speculation that washed over everything. Within hours, the GriefTech murders wasn't just a news story, it was a cultural phenomenon. It was a hashtag trending globally on Twitter. It was the subject of 1,000 feverish TikTok videos, with teenagers pointing at screenshots of Mark's face, overlaying text that read, "He killed his own father-in-law to start his company?" They pieced together timelines. They analyzed Chloe's Instagram for signs of psychopathy. They turned my family's private horror into a viral true crime saga. I watched, a ghost in a machine of my own making, as the world devoured the story I had written in secret. Ava sat beside me, not on a couch in our old, suffocating house, but on a stiff, functional chair. Her laptop was open, a constellation of news feeds and data streams. She was the navigator in this storm, tracking every current, every shift in the narrative. "They've got him," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "They're holding him without bail. Chloe too. Accessory after the fact. Conspiracy. They're throwing the book at them." She clicked a link, and a new window opened. It was a live feed from outside my old house. My home. It was surrounded by news vans, their satellite dishes pointing to the sky like metallic sunflowers. Yellow police tape cordoned off the lawn, a garish scar across the manicured green. I saw neighbors I had known for 20 years standing in their driveways, speaking into microphones, their faces a mixture of shock and a kind of grim excitement. "They always seemed so perfect," one woman said, shaking her head. "So perfect it was almost unnatural." The FBI didn't waste a moment. The Genesis list, the digital ledger of souls that Ava had unearthed from the depths of Mark's server, was their holy text. It became the roadmap for a national investigation. News reports showed grainy aerial footage of small-town cemeteries, of tents being erected over grave sites. The names from the list were read aloud on air, one by one. Paul Jansen, aged 48, originally ruled a climbing accident. Maria Flores, aged 32, a sudden and severe allergic reaction. Henry Cole, aged 65, brake failure. Each name was a ghost, stepping back into the light, their stories rewritten from tragic accident to calculated murder. Robert was the first. Product zero. The media latched onto that detail with a morbid fascination. The brilliant engineer, the loving husband, the foundation of the very family his son-in-law had destroyed. They exhumed his body. I forced myself to watch the segment. They spoke of toxicology reports, of subtle compounds that could induce a cardiac event, untraceable unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. The coroner who had signed the original death certificate was brought in for questioning. The doctor who had vouched for my dementia had his license suspended pending an investigation. The entire web of deceit Mark had so carefully woven was unraveling, thread by poisonous thread. Innovatech, his monument to hubris, imploded with spectacular speed. Its stock value, once the pride of the tech world, became a flat line on a graph. The sleek, glass and steel headquarters became a place of pilgrimage for the morbidly curious. YouTubers filmed themselves standing outside, speaking in hushed, reverent tones about the evil that had been planned within those walls. The Elysian Echoes technology, once hailed as a compassionate revolution, was now evidence in a mass murder trial. Every line of code was a digital breadcrumb leading back to Mark. The very product designed to simulate life was now an irrefutable testament to death. Chloe's betrayal was a special kind of media catnip. The daughter who chose her monstrous husband over her own mother. They dug up old photos of us, me holding her as a baby, the two of us smiling at her high school graduation. They juxtaposed them with the footage of her being led from the courthouse, her face a mask of stone, her eyes empty. Commentators debated her motives. Was she a victim, brainwashed by a master manipulator? Or was she a willing participant, a monster in her own right? I knew the answer. I had seen it in her eyes that day in the kitchen. The cold, hard choice she had made, but I said nothing. I just watched the world tear her apart, just as she had torn me. The system I thought would never believe me was now my greatest advocate. Legal experts dissected the case on cable news, marveling at the sheer audacity of the plan and the digital ghost that had brought it all down. They didn't know the ghost was very much alive, watching them from 1,000 miles away. They spoke of me, Elizabeth Hale, as a tragic victim who had died under suspicious circumstances, whose death had been the final piece of the puzzle. My accident on the stairs was the catalyst, the event that Ava's carefully edited recording had pointed toward Mark's guilt. They mourned me. They lauded my posthumous courage. It was a strange, disembodying experience to be eulogized by strangers while drinking a cup of lukewarm tea. A few days of this, a blur of headlines and talking heads, was enough. "Turn it off, Ava," I said one evening. The setting sun was painting the anonymous motel room in shades of orange and gray. Ava closed the laptop. The sudden silence was immense. It was the sound of the storm passing. The wreckage was still there, strewn across the national consciousness, but the wind and the rain had stopped. We were in the eye. "It's time," she said. We left before dawn. No goodbyes, no final glances. Elizabeth Hale was dead, buried under an avalanche of data and headlines. And in her place, a new woman walked out into the cool, pre-dawn air, carrying nothing but a small bag and the weight of a life she had been forced to burn to the ground. The air in our new home tasted of salt and renewal. It was a small, clean apartment, the kind of place that is deliberately unremarkable, with white walls and functional furniture. But the window, the great wide window in the main room, looked out over the Pacific Ocean, an endless, breathing expanse of blue and gray. That view was our luxury. The salt that misted the glass was a balm, scrubbing away the memory of that sterile, suffocating house. I was no longer Elizabeth Hale. That name, that woman, was dead, a character in a story that was now public domain. My new name was Helen, a simple, sturdy name, a name with no history. Ava sat across from me at a small wooden table, her own laptop open. The news no longer played on its screen. Instead, it displayed complex charts, encrypted ledgers, and offshore banking portals. She was building our new life, brick by digital brick, with the considerable funds she had meticulously siphoned from Mark's hidden accounts. The accounts meant to be his escape route, his golden parachute. Now, they were our foundation. It was the ultimate irony. The fortune he had built on death was now financing our rebirth. We were ghosts of a different kind now, not digital apparitions, but real people living outside the lines, untraceable, unburdened. We were free, but freedom had a phantom limb. I would wake up in the night, the muscle memory of grief pulling me from sleep, my mind reaching for Robert before I remembered he was truly gone. I would see a young woman on the street with Chloe's hair, and my heart would seize, a painful, involuntary spasm of loss. We had lost a family, a husband, a daughter, a son-in-law, a whole life, dismantled and scattered like ashes. But in the wreckage, we had found a brutal kind of justice. And in the quiet moments, watching the waves roll in, I wondered if that was enough. "I'm going for a walk," I'd say. Ava would just nod, her focus absolute. She was our guardian, our architect. She built firewalls around our new identities, created legends and backstories that were more real than the truth. She was a prodigy, but the weight of what she had done, the lines she had crossed to save me, to save us, had aged her. I saw it in the way she held her shoulders, in the constant, vigilant flicker of her eyes. I would walk along the beach, the cold sand sinking under my worn sneakers. I was Helen. I repeated it to myself. Helen who likes to watch the tide. Helen who buys her groceries from the little market on the corner. Helen who has no children, no dead husband, no history of a house with a locked basement. At the market, I handed my new ID to the young cashier. She glanced at it, then at me, and smiled. "Have a nice day, Helen," she said. The name, spoken by a stranger, felt both like a costume and a shield. It was the first time I felt a flicker of something other than grief or rage or fear. It was a tiny, fragile spark of peace. One afternoon, I came back from my walk to find Ava staring at her screen, but she wasn't working. She was watching something. I walked closer and saw it was old footage, a home video from her own childhood, a birthday party. I saw a younger me, laughing. I saw Robert, grilling burgers, waving at the camera. And I saw Chloe, a teenager, sullen and beautiful, rolling her eyes but unable to hide a small smile. "I was thinking," Ava said, not looking away from the screen. "About him. About Grandpa." "Me too," I whispered. "Mark didn't just kill him," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she rarely showed. "He erased him. He tried to turn him into product zero, a data point, a business expense. She finally turned to look at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. We gave him his name back. We made them see him again. That's what we did. She was right. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoration. It was about taking the narrative Mark had stolen and giving it back to his victims. We hadn't just exposed a killer. We had unearthed the truth of the lives he had tried to bury. We sat there for a long time, in the quiet apartment by the sea, watching the ghosts of our family flicker on the screen, not with pain, but with a kind of fierce, protective love. We had saved them from the fire, even if we couldn't save ourselves. A week later, a package arrived. It wasn't delivered to our door, but forwarded by one of Ava's contacts, a link in the invisible chain that kept us safe. It was a small, unassuming cardboard box. Inside, cushioned in foam, was a single object, a tablet. It was simple, elegant, a sheet of black glass and brushed metal. It looked unnervingly like a product Mark would have designed. There was no note, no sender, no explanation. Just the device itself, cold and silent. Ava took it, her brow furrowed in suspicion. She ran a dozen diagnostic checks from her laptop, scanning for trackers, for malware, for any digital trickery. "It's clean," she finally announced, her voice a mix of confusion and relief. "Completely isolated, a closed system." "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I knew this was the final echo of our old life. "I don't know," Ava said. She placed it on the table between us. "There's only one file on it, and it's set to autoplay when the device is turned on." We looked at each other. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room. The sound of the ocean was a distant, rhythmic sigh. "Turn it on," I said. Ava pressed the small button on the side. The screen flickered to life, not with a logo or a menu, but with a face. A perfect, high-resolution avatar of a little girl. She had bright, curious eyes, a sprinkle of freckles across her nose, and 2 front teeth missing. Her hair was the color of honey, caught up in pigtails. It was Chloe, my Chloe, but it was Chloe from a time before Mark, before the lies, before the poison had seeped into her soul. This was the 7-year-old girl who believed in fairy tales and held my hand when she crossed the street. The digital recreation was flawless, down to the faintest shadow of a dimple in her left cheek. The little girl on the screen smiled, a pure, uncomplicated smile. And then she spoke. Her voice was a perfect recreation of my daughter's childhood lisp, a sound I hadn't heard in 30 years, but remembered with a clarity that stole my breath. "Grandma?" the avatar asked, its head tilting with innocent curiosity. "Is it time to tell the story now?" I stared at the image of the daughter I had truly lost, the daughter who had died long before Mark ever pushed me down the stairs. The last piece of her I had managed to save from the fire. Ava had done it. She had used Mark's own monstrous creation, his own code, to build this for me. A final, secret project. This was my Elysian echo. Ava looked at me, her eyes searching mine, waiting for a reaction. Was this cruel? Was it a comfort? I didn't know. My hand went to my mouth, stifling a sob that was equal parts grief and a strange, terrible triumph. Mark sold false comfort to strangers. I had created a perfect vessel for my own pain. It wasn't a product to be sold. It was a witness, a memorial to the child who was, and a final, silent condemnation of the woman she became. This was my last act, not just of remembrance, but of revenge. It was a twisted, heartbreaking, and exquisitely personal reclamation. He had tried to write the story. He had tried to own the echoes of the dead. But now, this last echo was mine. The story was mine to tell. I reached out, and my fingers brushed against the cool glass of the screen, against the cheek of the ghost in my machine. "Yes," I heard myself say, the word cracking in the quiet room. "Yes, it is.